Hello, you're now listening to the Modem Podcast, where we deconstruct, examine, and discuss deeply technical data networking and information technology topics. Sit back and relax while we fire up Dial D and the 9600 baud modem and connect to the Wildcat BBS.
All right, we are back at the Modem Show. Today we've got returning I'm going to call you a co-host because you've been on more than anybody else.
Nice.
And
it's an upgrade.
You know, you're not just a guest; you're family now.
So this is how we do promotions on Modem.
Yeah. So today we got Kevin Myers back, and we're going to talk about something pretty compelling that he's got his grubby hands on. So yeah, and also with us is Chris Cummings. So it's Chris, me, Nick Buraglio, and Kevin, and it's gonna be fun because guess what we're gonna talk about? Tell them what we're gonna talk about. Kevin, tell them.
What are we talking about? Oh, we're talking about Mikrotik, aren't we? That's
Yes,
why you guys
are.
brought me on, right?
Hold on, we're having
an
episode of Modem with Kevin where we talk about Mikrotik.
I know, it's a shocker, isn't it? It's just it's shocking.
Shocking. And not just Mikrotik, but 100 gig Mikrotik, which was kind of shocking when I put it out, because there's a lot of people that kind of think Mikrotik's like this cheap $20 router with a 100 gig interface, and some people like legit lost, they lost it when they saw 100 gig Mikrotik. They were like, wow.
Yeah, and let me be so bold as to say it's not just like I got 100 gig interface and then like a bunch of it's like, they've thought about architectures and things about like where, what are the use cases? I'm going to need more than 100 gig interface. And, that it's not just, this isn't your grandmother's 100 gig, right? It's a lot more than that. I mean, not that your grandmother doesn't have great 100 gig routers, but.
Yeah, I am personally offended. My grandmother's 100 gig routers rule. Okay.
She puts too much cinnamon in them. So let's dive into this, because I think everybody now is like probably still in a bit of a state of shock, and I'd like to keep at that. I'd like to keep the shocking as long as possible.
So. Yeah, it was interesting. They we knew they were on the horizon because it got leaked a long time back. I think it was in the Linux kernel. I want to say it was in the mainline Linux kernel, because they're developing drivers for these things. And so in this obscure corner of the release notes for a version of Linux, there is this note from Mikrotik about a model of router that they're going to be releasing. And because Mikrotik has a very consistent naming standard for their ports, somebody noticed. They were like, oh, what's that? That's a 100 gig interface. And so as they tracked it back, then Mikrotik had actually updated their interfaces list, because they have in their doc, there is a guide to Mikrotik router naming. And somebody noticed that 100 gig had been added to the list of codes. And I'm pretty sure it's XQ, I think is what they use. I believe that's the designation. And so as we started looking at this was maybe a few years ago. I don't remember exactly how long. And one of the things that's interesting is it was supposed to come out a while back, but obviously, 2020 happened. We all know how that turned out. And so it delayed things a little bit in the launch. And so the good news is in 2022, they've got a ton of stuff queued up. A lot of the things that either weren't ready because of the pandemic, or they had the supply chain shortage, which, to be fair, Mikrotik has weathered it a lot better than a lot of other people. Not that they don't have things they're short of, but they've done a lot better on having things available. And so all of that kind of added up to them getting this 100 gig router out finally this year. And I think I got notification that it was shipping a few months ago, and was able to go ahead and put my name in the hat to reserve a couple. And I got the first 2 into service and like online and pinging in North America. So that was pretty cool. And I even had like pictures of him when the FedEx guy showed up with the routers, like by the door, and like the unbox. I should have, if I listened to my kids, they'd be like, "Dad, you should do an unboxing video." I was like, yeah, I don't know if I have all time for all that.
Well, yeah,
So
hold on, Kevin. I mean, as a co-host now of Modem,
Yeah.
you too could have your own unboxing video channel.
I
So
should. We should have a mic. We should do a. I'll tell you what. The next 100 gig router, we'll do an unboxing video. We could even do it live.
actually, it'd be
Um,
pretty fun. Yeah.
I
yeah,
think it would be fun. And I also want to follow up on what Chris said. As a co-host now, you are um, obligated to do that for
are there rights and
us.
responsibilities that come with this?
Well, there's
Oh yeah,
responsibilities. There's really no
Okay, there's no
rights.
rights. The's just responsibilities.
Yeah.
it's
We're
like the
all rights and no
Thunderdome of podcast.
reads.
Yeah.
So okay, so interestingly enough, so you they have this product. There's a series of them, right? There's like
Yeah, there are. There's a router and a switch. So where we're at right now is the CCR 2216 was the first 100 gig product to come out, and that was the router. And so as we look at the router at high level, it's 200 gig ports, and then it's 12 25 gig ports with a copper management port. And the Marvel Prestera ASIC that they use is all totaled. I have to go back and look. I think it's 600 gig of throughput total. I got to go back and look at the board because when they were tying the CPU in, I think they might have been counting like the full duplex bandwidth as part of the bandwidth equation in there. But the ASIC itself is capable of a lot. The Marvel Prestera ASIC that's in the 2216, and we've got to go look in the. Yeah, there it is. Chris has
Yeah.
got it
Yeah.
up. And there'll be links. We'll have links here so you can see it if
Yeah.
you're
So
listening to the audio.
Yeah.
basically
So
what
for
we're
what,
looking at here. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
well, I was gonna say for what folks who are audio only, listening to this on their podcatcher are not seeing here is basically just the topless version of the 2216 router, or I guess as Tony from Network Collective would say, the naked hardware.
That's
And
it.
yeah, and me, I'm kind of a geek about circuit boards and stuff. And so you can see, the CPU here with 4x PCIs, and it's connected to this big beefy switch chip. I mean, this thing's got a big heat sink on it. Like it's pretty monstrous. And the CPU is ARM based, right? On these?
It's ARM 64, yeah, and it's what's
Yeah.
interesting about it is it came out of Amazon, and it's Annapurna, which I think was an acquisition for them, and you can
Hmm.
actually use these if you go into AWS. It's called a Graviton chip, I believe, in AWS if you're going in and spinning something up, and they're pound for pound when you look at compute as far as power usage, they're like some of the best chips out there in the ARM 64 land. They're super super low power draw, which is another thing that was really unique about this series is that Microtik really came out with the right thing at the right time, because you look at what's going on in the world. I mean, we've had a pandemic, we've had a supply chain shortage, now we've got conflict in Europe, and I mean, the power energy crisis is it's a massive thing. Everybody, even people that
Yeah.
would normally not be concerned about power are talking about, we have a global energy crisis, and now here is this router that has this insanely low power draw that's 100 gig capable, and you can you can use it to do some really advanced stuff. So I think even just from the power perspective, it's an amazing proposition with the ARM 64 chip, to put into the network. So yeah, you've got the ARM 64 chip, 1225 gigs. I think everything's set up in 25 gig lanes, as I recall from looking at the ASIC
Yeah.
documentation, and the way that they're attaching it into the switch chip.
Well, and speaking of power, I do see dual power supplies, which is nice. I know, like for a while, Mikrotik wasn't always having dual power supplies, and that was kind of annoying. So it's nice to see that they've added that in here, and it looks like they actually have separate feeds to the motherboard too, which is interesting.
Yeah, and they're doing hot swap on those, and
They
so
are.
like, and so the you're talking about the CPU, and we've got another podcast where we kind of go into some more detail on the power consumption or lack thereof of the Mikrotik product
Yeah.
line. That's a prior episode with Kevin, pretty easy to find. We can link to it if we get a chance. But so we're looking at this circuit board layout. We've got 2 by Q SFP 2800 gigs, and then 12 SFP 28 25 gig slots. But more impressively, I think I want to focus a little bit on this switch chip here. It's a Prestera DX8 525 or something.
Mm-hmm. It's the Ultimate
And
series.
yeah, so I'm looking at the this is a Marvell Prestera, and I'm looking at the data sheet for that one, and it's calling out some pretty big protocol stack stuff here. You've got, they even mentioned OpenFlow 2.0, which,
Yeah.
not something I expected to see, but totally will do it. It's got
Never
VXLAN,
did.
GPE, Geneve or whatever. But talking about the throughput here is pretty interesting because you got over a terabit per second throughput with wire speed processing
Yep.
of 600 million packets per second. So that's pretty impressive. And this box costs what? How much?
It's 20. I think the list price on it is 2,700. So which usually means the street price is going to be 2,500, 2,600, something like that,
Yeah,
depending on the distributor that you get it from. And it's been selling like hotcakes. I mean, because
yeah,
not only is it a great router, like in and of itself, but you combine that with the fact that everybody else on the planet is waiting like a year to two for a router of any router. And so people have been buying them left and right. We have a big national backbone network um, in Africa that got a bunch of them. They were previously considering Cisco, but they're looking at these um, to try and use for border router aggregation. Some last mile aggregation for some heavy stuff, and because they can just do so much. I mean, it's so flexible with what you can do with the ASIC. And I think one of the interesting things about it is and this is in the router specifically, the CRS switch that we'll talk about in a little bit is a little bit different, but in the router, and they did this in the CCR 2116 too, is that they've paired a really capable ARM64 Amazon Graviton chip with a Marvel Prestera ASIC, so that even if what you're trying to do can't be done in the ASIC, you have a lot of runway in the CPU to do throughput, so that you can. I mean, it's a really good multi-purpose router. And now that they seem to be doing that on several models, and from what I understand is there's another model with more port density on the 100 gig side that is going to kind of fall halfway between switch and a router. That is, due to come out. We don't know the exact port density on it or, the details, but we do know that Mikrotik was really jammed up on releases from the pandemic. So the releases on the 100 gig stuff are going to come pretty frequently from now through, fall of this year. We'll see a lot of stuff coming out and some new 100 gig stuff. So yeah, that combination of the ASIC and the CPU is really interesting to me because there's a lot of things that you can do with that as you look at the protocol stack of what's possible in the ASIC. And these aren't like full tables or anything in the ASIC. I think it's 128,000 routes is possible in the 2216 of IPv4 unicast entries. And I haven't done the conversion because I don't think they've released it on what is possible with IPv6. So obviously, choose a little more TCAM. So I'm sure the table size is a little bit less. But the really neat thing is that Mikrotik has been working on these, and they have a name for it that I can't remember, but it's like a selective fib entry. Like basically, you can mark, you can put a command in to say I don't want this entry in the fib, or I do, and so you can actually put it into hardware and not put it into hardware manually. And then if you turn on the layer 3, it's what they call the layer 3 firewalling mode in hardware, where you have connection tracking, then it will actually automatically determine based on throughput which entries to put into hardware offloading for forwarding and which ones to keep in software. So if you're running, let's say you want to use this as a CGNAT gateway because you're trying to dual stack your network for IPv6. Now suddenly all of your biggest flows to, Netflix and Disney Plus, maybe not Netflix lately because that's been going down, but we'll say Disney Plus and all the other streaming services, you can go through there and offload those into hardware and then take the other stuff and put that into software. And so the flexibility that's possible on this platform is like we're just at the tip of the iceberg on it.
Yeah, that whole like Prestera line of chips is incredibly powerful. The things that it can do, not necessarily the one that's in this in this particular piece of hardware, but that whole series of chips can do everything from SRv6 to SPB to VXLAN and service function chaining and all kinds of really super powerful stuff. But I think we're seeing a shift, right? So the DFZ, the default free zone, is gigantic at this point, right? And it's becoming harder and harder to find hardware that'll actually hold all of that people can afford. Like there's a significant contingency of people that need to run full tables because they say they have a handful of providers and they want to do best path, but they're not necessarily going to be able to afford whatever the big iron is that can handle all of that. And I think what we're seeing is sort of the next evolution of what I can't remember who wrote it, but there was the Arista project that I think it was called SDR, where essentially this is on GitHub. He would run PM account D on the Arista and pull in basically the flow data inside the box, figure out where the most of the flows were, the most active flows, and it would install those into hardware. So it would allow them to buy significantly less expensive hardware
Right.
and still run full tables on it. I think it was Spotify. I wish I remember who wrote that, but that's essentially what this feels like to me with a lot more like this is a vendor support. Like the vendor just offers this, right? You're not hacking open source code to put onto a device.
I think like you said, approaches like that are just going to become more and more popular. I mean,
Yep.
the DFZ is not going to stop growing, and especially with V6, and like a lot of 48s and stuff like that, or
All the 48s.
I mean, yeah, and actually we were having a discussion about this on it was the Packet Pusher Slack room today. We were talking about multi-homing and how in IPv4 like you can kind of get away with using NAT for your multi-homing if you're a small enough place. V6 you can't really do that, or you can, but it's not really sanctioned or whatever. So the right way is to run BGP with your providers, right? And advertise stuff. Well, if you have every small to medium business enterprise running BGP, throwing routes into the DFZ,
That's not going to end well.
Like that's going to get big. Like, I mean, not every business out there that's multi-homed has an ASN. Like not every autonomous system out there has an ASN. And as IPv6 moves on, like that's going to cause an explosion of things. Heck, I mean, even if you're a home user and you want to, dual home, like, I mean, I don't know if you can get your home ISP to let you run BGP. I think Nick, you do that, but
so no, I've tried that, and I've worked on, or at least know very well almost all the service providers around me. Most of them I've actually done work for at one point or another, and I actually asked, can I have my own ASN? I have some V4, it's V6 space. Can I peer over this gig fiber that I've got? And if I would have really kind of pushed, they probably would have let me. They may charge me a little bit more money, but the main engineer came back, who I've known for a long time. He came back with a legitimate question. He's like, if you were running, would you do this? Would you do this for a customer? And right away, no way. Like I would have immediately said no.
Yeah.
So the fact that they even entertained it was nice. But
no, the only place I've ever come across that you've been able to do it is certain parts of cable operators networks. I have been able to flip a business cable modem into a peering, because if you know the right people, I've gotten that done. But it's like, it's not the norm. It's not like, it's probably like in the like less than 5% of use cases of a standard business DIA circuit that you're going to get. That's not in a data center or is not like a SLA type DAA circuit. That's but yeah, so it is possible, but it's so rare that it's not. I don't see it as practical. I think it'd be cool if we could figure it out. It'd be great if everybody had a routing protocol to just move their space around to wherever. But I don't think we're at that level where we can solve that kind of problem down at that small level with what we have to work with and our scale options for protocols.
Yeah. I guess all that to say, like, even though for some networks it's still yet to be decided how that works. Like fib sizes are still gonna explode, regardless of that, because there's a lot of businesses that have business class DIA that you could turn into transit pretty easily for not much more cost. And once that starts happening, that's where technology like this I think is pretty cool, and I could see a lot of other vendors really wanting to start doing
and
that.
traffic engineering too. Like that's the other reason the global table is exploding is a lot of, in IPv4, we didn't really have that many if you were lucky, you had a lot of prefixes to work with, but not everybody, most orgs, unless you're a larger service provider, are going to have 22 and under, maybe a 21 and under, something like that. That's what most orgs that are smaller that would have that. But I mean, you think about, if you have multiple peering points and you have IPv6, I mean, I've definitely seen people throwing 48s out like Skittles to massage the traffic where they want it to go.
Oh, for sure.
Like that's just going to continue to get worse. So to your point, Chris, that having to start learning how to dealing with some of this in compute is going to have to be a way that we move forward to be able to deal with the sprawl of the global table.
So speaking of that, there's two things. What you mentioned V6, of course, right? Why, it's modem show, but does this route offload work in V6 yet?
It's almost there. They've been working on the hard, like the ASIC absolutely supports it. They've been working. Mikrotik had to first go. They have FastPath, which is kind of the software optimization when you're doing, in CPU. When it sees certain flows, it says, okay, I can make this faster and less expensive in CPU. By doing certain things. So really complex connections won't, go into FastPath. Where you have like, multiple modifications to the packet flow, and you've got, multiple interfaces tied in. But like when you have a clear ingress and egress out of the board, where you have a, clear in, clear out, maybe a VLAN, something that's not terribly complicated, maybe a firewall rule or two, you can often get into FastPath for IPv4. And then the FastPath is also kind of the basis by which they use to push it down into hardware, into the ASIC. And so IPv6 FastPath is what they're working on. The FastPath, I think they also fast track for like the connection tracking. And so they've been working on all of that so that in working with Marvel's development kit, that they can get all that pushed into hardware. And I know it's under active development. I know they're working on it. I don't know when it's going to get released, but my understanding is, my guess, and from what I've seen come out of Mikrotik, is that we should see that by like summertime, if not sooner, that will be there and ready. Because in my testing on the beta versions, I already see them flagging the IPv6 routes in hardware, just like I see on MPLS, but it's not like marked as active. So they're at the point where you can actually see these routes getting marked as candidates to be into the ASIC, but they're just not getting put in there yet because they haven't turned that, part of the stack on.
Yeah, I know they've done significant. I mean, so they were limited by the old history lesson. The router OS version 6 was limited by a fairly ancient kernel, and so there were a lot of shortcomings in V6. When they moved to V7, it was almost it wasn't almost, it was a breakneck speed that they were fixing V6 stuff and bringing it up to speed with V4. And I know it's coming. I just wasn't sure if it was there yet, because the hardware definitely does it.
Yep.
But the other thing that you mentioned, and Chris kind of touched on it too, is, okay, so you've got this Marvell Prestera chip, and it does all this great stuff. It can push all these great features down into hardware, and there's all this support, on pretty much the entire product line, right? But the other thing that was like eye-watering to me was not necessarily that. I mean, that was cool, and I think there's a lot of use cases for it. But talk about, so you've done a lot of testing with this, Kevin, because you've got these boxes in hand. You got toys to play with, so you're building stuff. Can you talk about the not processing, like talk about the packets this thing can move in the CPU itself?
Yep.
And just for context here, if folks haven't worked on old 6500 gear that was probably too long in the tooth to be running like as a BGP router, you probably don't know what this means. But there's, when things get when Ceph forwarding stops working because you've gone over your TCAM allotment, it punts everything into CPU, and there's literally like one log message and that's it. And there's a very specific way you have to go and look for it. It's really cryptic. So CPU processing for old school folks, you're just going to be like, wait a minute, what? You don't want to process things in CPU. But I think it is a brave new world now. And I think Kevin has the proof that that is no longer an issue.
Yeah, so it's interesting because we've been in this, Nick, we've come, we came up, in the 90s in IT, and that whole world where, it used to be that a router meant that it was a CPU, right? Like that was a clear delineation of a router back in the day versus a switch, is that we had a chip and a switch, we had a CPU and a router, and that's the way it was. Then we had L3 ASICs and the whole world changed, and marketing, confused everything. But as chassis got built, like you said, we had the supervisors in there, which we still have. And back in the day, there was kind of an expectation that ASICs were simpler. So there were certain features that were just never going to get, put into an ASIC. So you had CPUs that could move things, and, and you say, okay, I can do this much in CPU. And so I'm okay with that. And I'll let that go through the supervisor. And then I'm going to have this, stuff go into an ASIC. And then as ASICs got more complicated and, more feature rich, we can do lots of things in there. And so, most cases, and I'm sure somebody will find an exception they tag me with, but if you look at most architectures of switches these days, of a lot of them are called routers, but you look at Juniper, look at Nokia, look at Cisco, look at what anybody is doing. You're going to have your control plane supervisors, route switch processors, routing engines, call them what you will, that slot in. You get your line cards, and then the feature sets are such that you can put most everything into hardware these days on the higher end routers. And so the expectation that if it does get punted into CPU, there's usually not an expectation that you're going to move a lot of traffic in them, even though they're pretty decent CPUs. Like, it's just not designed to say like, oh, I'm going to go put 100 gig into my route engine just like because. And so because that's the way the architecture is evolved, is towards hardware and CPU only for control plane, and a little bit of forwarding plane when you need to. Coming out with a router that has an ASIC and this really beefy CPU is kind of a novelty, because you have I think technically it's 100 gig full duplex, but total throughput is in the CPU is about 200 gig if you're taking both sides of a 100 gig connection. So like if you're an ISP, that's helpful because you're not as concerned with the upload. You're not going to chew up as much upload. So if you need to go above 100 gig, in the download side, you can cheat a little bit and borrow from that. If you want to use this for a border router, say, and you're going to go over the table size in the ASIC and you're going to lean on the CPU, you could do that because you've got a lot of juice in this. And so when I started testing it, I wasn't, sure what we'd find, because I did the original CCR 1072 testing, which was a great box back in the day. And we still use it for a lot of things, but we found out that really, really complex, really complex things that it had to do, like BGP peering, PPPoE terminations, like OpenVPN. If you weren't doing simple things in the Tolera, which is an older processor architecture for Mikrotik, it struggled with it. And part of it was the Linux kernel, but it just was not the CPU architecture that was going to really go just chew through BGP routes really, really quickly. Now you have these really beefy ARM60U processors, and you can do all of that. And so the test that I set up that I thought was interesting was, okay, when I first did my testing of like the 1072 and some other platforms in Mikrotik, and I wanted to see how many routes it would load, I just like loaded the routes from a route generator in Linux, and I didn't have a load on it. And that was cool. And then I thought, okay, well, you do have a load on it as a normal border router. So when I was doing testing years ago, I'd put a few gig through it because that's what I had in the lab. But when I actually decided to do these, I was like, I need to put together enough throughput that I can really kind of ramp this up. So I got a bunch of Mikrotik CCR 2004s that have the 2 by 25 gig ports, and got enough of them arrayed together so that I could do 100 gig full duplex through it using the traffic generator tool. And if you're not familiar with traffic generator, it's kind of like a poor man's RFC 2544 test. You can do packets out of order. You can build your packet like to whatever you want it to be, your packet profile, and say, I want this to be, UDP or TCP or both or multicast or whatever it is. And it'll give you packets out of order, as well as it'll hit it with small packet sizes so that you can see, under the different packet sizes, how does it perform? And so what I wanted to see was testing it under 1500, because most of the people that want to use this thing that I know of are going to be ISPs doing it as a border router or as a BNG type router, and they're going to want to move packets to 1500 because it's the internet. So that was the first test I did, and UDP wise, like I was able to get it to 100 gig with UDP with no problems. Now that wasn't a super strict stress test. I did not like go measure all the different packets that were lost and out of order. So then I went back to do a TCP test of, I think it was like 25 gig that I put through it. And so that's what I did when I did the convergence testing, because I thought, and I have more on tap. I just haven't set up the test. But what I published in a blog, which you guys I think you're going to have the link and going to put out here from the initial testing that I did, was I just threw a 25 gig load through each of the boxes, so that I could converge. I think I did like a couple million routes in V4. And I didn't do IPv6 only because our Linux route generator wasn't quite ready yet. And as we found out, we had some stability problems with it. Little sidebar, GoBGP apparently had a memory bug, and that was what kept causing our crashes. And they fixed that a few days ago. So we're recompiling, and we think we're good to go for our V6 routes now in our route generator. But at 2
How'd you guys
million
fix
routes,
that?
was
I'm
that
glad you guys worked to fix that, because I've run into that exact bug for my own container that does this, and Nick can attest at work that we were using something similar. with GoBGP and MRT files, and it was like, yeah, after it runs a while, it just dies.
Yeah, it would just kind of die. No, I mean, to be clear, we didn't fix it, but we just happened to notice somebody found it and fixed it, and it was and so Sajin, I think you guys know, is one of our developer guys. He was like, hey, they finally fixed this, so we tested it and it's good to go. So in future testing, I should be able to start really throwing IPv6 and IPv4 tables and to maybe describe that a little bit. These are not just we're not just generating the prefix and with nothing else like artificially. These are live tables that are coming out of ripe and other collectors that have they have BGP communities, they've got ASPaths, they've got meds, they get all the stuff you'd expect to see in a BGP table because it's a live table. And so as the router's got to chew through all that, each of those little pieces is adding to the complexity of the convergence time. And so we did that, and that's what I did with V4 to feed a couple million routes in. And what was interesting is that it was, as far as we could tell from the work we do with ASRs and MXs, that it was a little bit faster than Cisco and Juniper. Now, to be fair, I had the ASIC turned off because I knew that would delay the push into hardware. So I wanted to see like how fast can I get this in with my fastest route. So I haven't yet measured it as we're pushing into the ASIC, which is the way that an MX or an ASR is going to get measured. So to be fair, it's not an apples to apples test, but at the same time, I can't go throw 100 gig through an ASR or an MX in software either. So I have a capability here to go faster. Well, I mean, maybe in the high end ones you can.
But. You also can't buy one, or
well, that's a
not for a couple $100 either.
That's a fair point too. I can't. Yeah, you can get these. They're $2,500, and I can get 100 gig through it and do rapid convergence. And I think Nick, you pointed it out that there's a gap there, right? Like if you want to be able to do full tables, the routers that you can get your hands on that can do full tables that will do it well at speed, in the gap of where like Mikrotik and even though I don't really like Ubiquity routers, like I'm fine with their other stuff. Their wireless gear's, pretty good for commercial wireless, but their routers, they haven't really touched their routing stack in a while, but some people do use them. They use them for border routers. And so they often get thrown in with Mikrotik as a competitor. Mikrotik's definitely a lot further ahead, but whichever one that people would use, they didn't have a ton of options. They had like 1 gig and 10 gig options. And then if you wanted anything beyond that, for the ISPs that we work for, we'd normally go get an MX204. Because I mean, MX204 was, before the pandemic, it was not insanely expensive for, the price point. It was a good kind of unicorn box. And then the supply chain crisis hit and it became hard to get. So it left ISPs in this space where if you needed to land a 100 gig circuit, even if you're only buying 20 gig of transit over it, and you want to say, hey, maybe I'm going to put 40 or 50 gig through this box. There wasn't anything between the, hey, here's $1,000 border router from Mikrotik or Ubiquity, and hey, here's a $50,000 border router from Cisco, Juniper, or whatever. And there was no in between. This kind of fills that gap now. There is something there.
This has always been a gap.
Yeah, it's always been there, and
it's always been a huge gap. And even the MX204 has its limits, right? It's sort of the bare minimum, I think, to get to that carrier grade where you can take the full tables, you can drop a 100 gig circuit, and let's call it what it is. Maybe I'm wrong, but like I'm going to say that 100 gig is the new 10 gig, right? Like I don't see a lot of people delivering anything that isn't 10 or 100 in the wide area space. Sure, in the data centers and in your campus where you can do 25 gigs and whatever else, but you're not going to be able to buy a circuit that is 25 gig from like a transit provider. They'll sell you a 100 gig interface with a 25 gig DIA guarantee. And so there's that gigantic gap that has always existed of I need to run full tables. I'm not big enough to be able to afford a $50,000 router. $50,000 to some of these ISPs that are right on that cusp, it might as well be $1 million, right? And so the fact that you can buy this like $3,000 or whatever it is, and you can drop these interfaces on it and do all this stuff, it's really pretty game changing, to be honest.
The other thing I really like is that it just fits into that niche of like they really went for parallelization on a lot of things. Whereas, I know obviously you're not going to be doing for CPU forwarding, just looking at the block diagram on this, you're not going to be doing 100 gig single flows because it has 4 25 gig lanes to the CPU. Okay. But for the kind of people who are using this, that's not what they need. They need a bunch of like iMix, packet sizes and a lot of small flows and stuff like that. And so like if you're willing to compromise on some of that stuff, like it's just amazing what you can get done.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, and for the people that are going to be that need single flows, that's generally like story time. Um, Jumping ahead a bit to the switch the switch that they're releasing, small high performance compute clusters was their POC.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yep.
the ASIC, even though it's I think I can do like 8,000 flows or something like that. And when you turn on the firewall mode, if you go look in the it's like 8 to 10,000 if you go look at that. So that's the other nice thing about the flexibility of this is if you do need to do a flow, well, I guess actually I need to go back and look. I think those are connected by 25 gig lanes as well, even in the other ones. So I don't know if that would you tell me if that would
Well,
work across the hardware. I don't know if you could do single flow in the ASIC with 25 gig lanes or not, because
I don't know if
normally
they're
get that deep in the hardware.
Yeah, I don't know if they're lanes or if they're actually presented as another Ethernet interface. I'd probably
Right.
depends. But it's still like that's the beauty of these things is like they're not really poised as much for that space. The switch, like within the switch chip, it's gonna be fine.
Right.
But like when you're going up at the CPU, yeah, that's where it's gonna fall apart
Yeah,
on that.
so-
But even then, 25 gig flows, like in most of the ISPs that this is targeting, that's like okay, that's never going to happen.
Right.
No,
you're not going to have
not.
a
I mean, I
customer
saw the
connected
first
like that.
somebody in the Netherlands was like, I got my first 25 gig circuit because somewhere somebody's got some kind of
Yeah, I
active
did see that.
Ethernet, that's selling that. But like you're right, like the 99% of people, gig fiber is like, that's like elite, because people are coming from, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, whatever. So
I'd
yeah,
still murder Nick just to get fiber in my house. Like I would go drive over and okay, I can't beat up Nick, but I would try if I could get gig fiber, and I can't.
I hate to
So
sell
for
out.
for the listeners, I must say that there is literally a fiber vault that I can throw a baseball from and hit Chris's house, and he still doesn't have fiber.
So Nick told me that he could get you fiber, but he doesn't want to, and I didn't want to air that out here publicly, but I'm just gonna let you know.
I knew it. All right.
So I wanted to circle
Cash
back
me
around to
outside.
something. Nice. I want to circle back to something because we touched on something that I think is not necessarily related to the Mikrotik, but it may have been confusing a little bit to the listeners because it's sort of a specialized thing. So when you're talking about doing route testing, and for the record, the way that we test routes, or at least the way that I set it up when I was still doing it, where Chris and I work, is we actually took that VM, Kevin, that you made, and I updated it and use that for our route generation.
Oh,
so
the old one, the one from a few years back,
yeah. So I rebuilt that as a newer OS and then added some other things. But basically, what you do is you get these. They're called MRT files. It's like multi-threaded router toolkit, and it's an RFC 6390 something 96 or something, and it is a standard format where a route table is dumped into a file, and that file has all the attributes that you would normally find if you did like show IP route or show IPv6 route or whatever on your network hardware size. The AS path, it has all that stuff in it, and it dumps it into a file. And researchers use this, like Route Views generates them, RIPE generates them, and you can just go grab them. But ExaBGP allows you to sort of take these in and then read them and spit them back out as an actual BGP announcement. So it allows you to give a realistic test of this is what, if I want to test like the DFZ on a router that doesn't have any connectivity to the DFZ, this is how you would do it. So I just wanted to circle back to that because that's a kind of a complicated thing, and we kind of just talked about it and then moved on.
But, and I think this is something you can look at, like if you're listening to the audio feed, you can go look at the link. But in the there's a blog article that'll get linked in there where I kind of have a layout that shows how I did this, and there's a hypervisor that is connected into the CCR 2216s through my lab setup, so that essentially what I was doing is I had 4 VMs that handled all of this. I had the 2 VMs that were generating the routes. And then I had 2 VMs that were actually the peering routers. Actually, no, I said that was 4. It was 4 VMs I was using, not 2. But I had these 4 different VMs that were doing it. In fact, it's funny enough, Nick. I used the old route generator for this because we were still kind of fighting some issues in our new one that has IPv6. So this is the old standby from the from the blog article a few years ago. I just
It works.
quadrupled the routes. And so I took a CHR, a Mikrotik CHR on version 7, and used that as my upstream peering router. And then I went and put and those are the 198.18 addresses that you see there in the drawing. And those were my upstream peers, and then those peered into the route generator, because as you probably learned in dealing with the route generator, sometimes they don't always build routes in a really fast way. So if you want to get a really quick test, you've got to have an intermediate peering router that learns those routes, and then your test router can peer with that router. And I
Yep.
think, as I understand it, I got to go dig onto the Cisco T-Rex, which is my next evolution for this lab, to be able to test convergence and table scale and throughput, packets out of order, things like that. I believe it uses Bird, and it can also spin up full table testing, but kind of like timestamp like when it converges. They've got kind of like an actual, as I'm reading it, if I'm reading it correctly, when I read the notes, there's an actual framework that will kind of, test BGP for you and stamp some metrics around how fast it's converging, because I think they're spitting up an actual IP in some of these routes and then testing that reachability to test convergence, if I read it right.
That's pretty cool. That's
Yeah, which I
basically
thought
how
was
I
pretty
did it
cool.
too.
And if it
I,
isn't
I
what that does, then we'll write that, because that sounds cool. Um,
yeah.
but but that was the end game I was trying to get to, is get this set up to where we could, like I said, we tested a couple of million routes. We had 44-minute, I think, time convergence into forwarding. And that wasn't like a perfect test. Like in Mikrotik, the routes are marked with an A. So in Mikrotik land, when the routes are marked with an A, that means they are active and they're ready to forward traffic. And so, as best as we can tell from spot checking the fib, all the routes were loaded like first to last. And so it's not a perfect science, but one of the things I did notice is, even though I didn't do this perfectly last time, when we were testing things like the 1072 and the 1036s of the older generation, when we worked for dozens of ISPs that would put those into prod and go peer out with all the different tier 1 carriers, we weren't that far off on our tests. Our numbers were pretty close as to how fast they would build routes. So it'll be interesting to see the numbers that I've got here for the 2216 as we actually light up real transit peerings, what those numbers look like as they're converging. But we had 2 million routes in 44 seconds learned and in forwarding, and then withdrawn in 46 seconds. And that was huge for Mikrotik, because that was always the Achilles heel of the old kernel and the old operating system is, you could learn a few routes, like, it would usually take a few minutes and it'd be kind of slow. But I had an outage one time with a transit carrier that was using those, and we had like a 30-minute route withdrawal one time. And like, we didn't know it because it was hard to get the Mikrotik to spit the route out. But when you looked at the route server that was outside the ASN, it was holding on to that route for a while. So anyway,
That reminds me of a war story, Kevin, of when I had a Juniper router that I once left BGP's debugs or whatever turned on. Then I brought up full tables with it. And it took like 30 minutes to converge. And I was like, what is going on? Like, this thing is just garbage. It doesn't perform well. And I even got to the point where the CLI timed out. If you would like show
Oh,
BGP summary,
wow.
it would just be like, error, could not connect to daemon. I give up. Because it was just writing this log file over and over with every BGP update message.
Oh man.
Oops.
Yeah, don't do that.
So I have a similar war story that was kind of funny. So I loaded all these routes up, and I got all these loaded in my lab, and everything was good to go. And then I left it for a while. So I came back and I was going to test something entirely different. And I think you guys have used Unimus before, right? We've talked about Unimus before. It's great low code automation tool. If you're like me, if you are not an Ansible jockey or Python jockey like me, Unimus is great to automate some low stuff. And so I was using Unimus to manage like updates for the Mikrotik gear, push some basic config. And so I go in and I have this whole fleet. I think I have over half a rack now that's just dedicated for V7 testing. And so I was going in, I was updating everything. The 2216s like kept failing. And I'm like, man, that sucks. Is there like some like interop bug with Unimus, like where it doesn't like it? And so I started doing a little digging, and I was like, okay, well, it's like I can't, ping Mikrotik by DNS name. And it took me a minute to realize I still had 900,000 full table routes on there. So when it was trying to reach out to Mikrotik, it was going into Never Never Land. And so once that kicked in, I was like, oh, let me turn my feed down, and of course it
Mm.
connected right away and updated. But yeah, that was
Yeah,
fun.
we actually did a podcast with Tomas.
Tomas.
It might have been it was our second podcast, I think,
Was
where
it?
we talked
Yeah.
about Unimus. Yeah, we need to get him back on to talk about their testing framework, which is unbelievable.
Mm.
But yeah, it's a nice platform for that low code automation push stuff. ZTVI uses it, for what we're doing with that, and it kind of just does what it does.
It's what I'm running the whole Mikrotik V7 lab on there. And in fact, if you go look in the when you go look in the links to the article and you read the when you read the notes about the lab that shows the BGP lab, underneath I have the whole V7 testing lab, which shows all the different things that I put in the rack for V7, and I'm using Unimus to test a lot of that because I put a bug into Mikrotik about MPLS. And so one of the other cool things that these boxes do is that they will do MPLS in hardware, even though Mikrotik hasn't finished that part of it. And then they added LDPv6, which I thought was awesome because now we can run a pure IPv6 underlay. And so it took a few revisions for everything worked and kind of stayed up. They had a bunch of, they had some IGP work to do. I had some OSPF issues, and then LDP and VPLS had some odd issues, and they got all of that buttoned up. And then I was still having problems with running the AFI for V4 and V6 together. So I thought, okay, let me split them apart and see if that works. And sure enough, it did. And what I found was, and this is where I started using Unimus, is I basically wrote myself some kind of little automation scripts where I could turn on the routers that I was using building MPLS on, which was a 2116 and the 2216s, and then some other V6 gear to test RouterOS version 6 interop. I could turn off like all of IPv6 or LDPv6, that is, to see if V4 would work. And then I would turn that off and then turn all of IPv6 back on and be able to switch between the two AFIs end to end between the PEs. And that's where I learned that using the two AFIs together was a bug. Like the forwarding plane just broke. And funnily enough, I just got a note back from Mikrotik that they recognized the bug, they got the bug, and they'll be fixing it so that you can actually run those AFIs together, hopefully in the next release of beta code. So that's really cool because now, we can start doing some stuff like V6 underlays. So, here you have a box that can do IPv6 in hardware once they finish that off, and do MPLS in hardware and put labels in hardware. And we can run a pure V6 underlay and run IPv4 as a service. And that is insanely cool to me.
Yeah, I did some work with the LDPv6 when they first implemented it, and I ran into those problems where I could get it to come up and do the things, but it wasn't appropriately distributing the labels, and so I couldn't build LSPs and stuff. And I'm glad to see that they fixed that. But I think that sort of circles back around to the capabilities that this hardware is able to sort of harness. They can just add LDPv6. We can have this V6 only underlay. They can add, if you go look at the spec sheets for the different versions of this chipset, I mean, it's pretty incredible on what it can do. It's they're one of their higher end ones will do, SRMPLS, SRv6.
Yep.
I mean, SRv6 in and of itself is like, there's not a lot of big box gear that does that. So the fact that this chipset can do it, it's possible they can add it, is yet another differentiator that we may yet see. Hopefully, I would like to see that.
I've already made the request there's a forum thread that you can also link on the show where I kind of outlined a need for EVPN, ISIS, and segment routing. That those are three protocols I thought would be a huge addition to Mikrotik to really be able to use it as interop for a number of things. Like in the data center world, they added VXLAN a couple of years ago, and VXLAN can be hardware offloaded in these boxes. So imagine being able to use this for VXLAN if you're in a data center world. And they don't have EVPN yet, but they've just written a new BGP stack. And so as we raise this, Mikrotik's answer in the forums is like, we got to get through V7. But after that, we are open to adding more stuff once we kind of get through that work and stabilize that. So it wasn't a no. And I think that, if there's a clear use case and enough operators are saying, yes, we want this, I think there's this really strong likelihood you will see things like SRMPLS and ISIS and EVPN. And then was that?
Yeah, I mean, Microtik,
that
this is me officially saying you should add those things. And if you want use cases, I'll give you a list.
ISIS win.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
protocol
ISIS to me
simplification
is like the
just by
perfect.
itself.
for a low power architecture, when you have a low power architecture and CPUs that are designed around that, most implementations of ISIS I've seen tend to be more CPU efficient than OSPF. I think I've heard people make the argument that in an academic sense they should be roughly equal because they use the same algorithm. I've heard that argument made, but what I have seen in practice is that ISIS tends to always have less control plane utilization than when we go in and convert to ISIS on a production network, away from OSPF. We almost always see control plane CPU reduction.
Yeah, I mean,
Is
you're
it
you're
tends to
not
be
you're not
more efficient.
relying at that point. You're not relying on. There's no reliance on the protocol that you're routing to do any of the communication, right? So you gain efficiency by having that totally decoupled. In theory, like I'm guessing, right? I don't know if that's
Yeah, I
actually
mean,
accurate, but it makes sense.
I don't get. I just know, like, I don't. I can't get. Not being a not being a routing stack engineer and marrying into the hardware. I couldn't speak to that side, but I've migrated a lot of networks, and almost always we will see ISIS have a drop in control plane utilization when compared to OSPF on same gear, same code, same network. Everything else is generally the same. So what I see is for this architecture that is ARM 64 low power CPU architecture. And the reason I mention that is that OSPF scaling is sometimes a challenge in some of the Mikrotik gear. They've come a long way in optimizing it. They shorten the OSPF message size in some updates in RouterOS version 6. I've been working on optimizing OSPF, so I don't know yet where scale for OSPF is, where normally when you would get into like somewhere between like 3 to 5,000 interior routes in Mikrotik and OSPF, that might be time to start moving into a different area, so that you just don't have as much, in one area for SPF to deal with. And there are a few networks we've worked on that have been massive that definitely fell down at a certain size. So, understanding going forward into RouterOS version 7 and on this hardware, where the OSPF scale is, where the IGP scale is, I don't know. But I think ISIS would be a great addition to the protocol stack for that,
Well,
to put
well,
in there.
what I'm hearing is Microtik needs to implement it, and then we
Yep.
can test it, and then we can say for sure. So
Yeah,
best,
for sure.
best just get to it so we can
Yeah,
prove that we were right this whole time.
Yep.
I mean,
And
and Kevin says do it, and there's documented proof that Kevin
That's
is
right.
quote basically family with
That's right.
Mikrotik. So I think
I think
there's
I
a
think
pretty
there
good
is
chance
evidence
they'll
on
listen.
Twitter that's out there
We'll
from
put that in
my
the
Indeed.
show notes.
Mikrotik, Mikrotik official Twitter account.
Yep.
But yeah, if I were to like put my wish list on this in order, just because looking at like this from I think what is probably the easiest lift. I mean, none of it's probably easy, but if I look at the more straightforward lift, I think EVPN is probably the most straightforward because their BGP stack already exists, and so we're just adding to BGP at that point. Adding a whole IGP, there's probably a fair amount of work there, and then adding the extra things that you need to create an SR compatible IGP is also probably a fair amount of work. So I see those as EVPN, then ISIS, then SRMPLS, so that kind of tackle them in order of difficulty. That and the fact that if you have EVPN, then EVPN VXLAN becomes immediately useful while they're working on the other
Yeah.
stuff, and you have a good pairing
Yeah.
there.
Yep. That's a great point. And I think that whole list, that order makes total sense too. Adding an additional IGP is not as laborious, in theory, as adding another AFI or whatever to BGP
And,
that
and
already exists and is well documented.
and frankly, it doesn't give as much. I mean, as obviously ISIS is better. I mean, well, I don't know. My opinion is that ISIS is better than OSPF, but OSPF works, right?
Yep.
And so it is functional. So I mean, were I to make decisions about it, I would totally see EVPN, which would give you a lot more over just VPLS and IPVPN today, and that would be a huge win.
Yep.
Yep.
And that's kind of my take. So that's what things that we're looking at on the horizon. There's so much that they could do because, and this is probably another really important point to talk about, is that when Mikrotik was on the Tolera architecture, there was this. I think there was this hope that Tolera was going to be what the ARM 64 Marlboro pairing is now. If I go look at 10 years in the past, and what Tolera was very promising. Everybody kind of thought it would take off as this low power architecture, and it just kind of stayed very niche. And Mikrotik, as far as I know, was one of the biggest consumers of it, and it did a good job. I mean, for the things that we used it for, it did a pretty good job. But eventually it kind of fell out of favor. And as I understand it, Tolera became so low usage that it dropped out of mainline Linux, the mainline Linux kernel, as far as hardware and driver support. And Mikrotik had to go back, and I think they had to write like their own kernel to kind of keep dealing with it, because Tolera got sold. I think, I want to say Mellanox owns them now. I think technically, I think it's a Mellanox property, but Tolera is kind, is kind of dead ended, and so they still make it, but it was this thing where a lot of the things we wanted to do, you just couldn't do because the SDK wasn't there. And now that you have the ARM64 architectures and the Marvel Prestera chips that are in all of the new stuff, the sky is the limit. I mean, ARM64 isn't going anywhere. Marvel Prestera is all over the place. It's not going anywhere. In fact, little known fact, if you go dig on the web, a lot of the Cisco Meraki gear uses the exact same chips, the exact same models even, that are in the CRS 300 series in Mikrotik. And they go to great pains and lengths to hide that because they don't want you to know that's in there. But I found a switch with the same, I think it was like a 24 port PoE switch that was the same. And I think, it was a couple $1,000 switch in Meraki world, and it was a $300 switch in the Mikrotik world. And obviously they run different code sets, but that tells you where the Marvel Prestera stuff gets used. It's getting baked into a lot of things. And so if you want it in its most economical form, Mikrotik is definitely where it's at.
Yeah, I agree. Man, we were all over the place with this one. I thought, we're going to spend all this time talking about this 100 gig stuff. And we did. I mean, we went through that pretty well. But then, when you get the three of us together, it tends to spiral, which I love. But I think we're coming up on about an hour. So I think probably better wrap it, put a bow on it.
So do we have 5 more minutes to throw a few things in for fodder for next time?
Sure.
So I'll be real quick. So they do have a switch that we haven't talked about, and we can maybe get into that in a future episode. There's a 4-port 100 gig switch that just came out. Really cool fun fact: it can be PoE powered with 802.BT. So a 100 gig switch that's 4-port that can be PoE powered. It's not the same family of Marvel chips, but it uses a different chipset that's in the Marvel family. It's mainly positioned as a layer 2 switch, and an ISP that we're working for just ordered one because they want to break out an MX204 that doesn't have enough ports. So we're going to put it north of an MX204 to break out 100 gig ports. So that's amazing. Coming up. There's other 100 gig stuff coming up. So maybe when we come back and more of the 100 gig stuff is released, we can do 100 gig version 2.
Yeah, I mean, I'm totally up for that. And I would circle back to the very beginning where we said that you're basically a co-host. And so not only can we, you're obligated now.
That's right. Gotcha. That's right. I have responsibilities.
You have responsibilities. Yes.
You're stuck.
I went 5.
All right.
Don't stop holding on.
All right. Let's wrap it up. So, yes, we want to thank Kevin for coming on again, dropping some wisdom, talking some 100 gig, and we'll do it again. So, Kevin, if people are looking for you on the net, where can they find you?
So you can find me on Twitter at Stubberry51. You can find me on LinkedIn under Kevin Myers. Facebook is the same thing, and then you can also find me on my company page, which is IPArchitechs, which is IPArchitechs.com. And yeah, I think that's all the places.
Great. Chris, where can people find you?
Oh, I'm on the web. I'm online. They let me on. Chris Cummings is my name. I am on Twitter. That's I think the only social media I'm really on, at CrankyNetman. Yeah, that's about it. You can find me yelling about IPv6 on the Packet Pusher Slack today. I'm on some of the networking Slacks, Network to Code, all those. Network Collective, or Underlay, rather. Yeah, on the internet. /64.tech, modem.show, you name it.
He's everywhere. All right. Well, I'm Nick Buraglio. You can find me on Twitter at Forwarding Plane whenever I'm on there, which is sometimes.
Do we have to dial in to find you? Since this is
yes, you got to dial up. Obviously, modem.show, forwardingplane.net, LinkedIn. That's on various networking Slacks. Brothers Wisp Slack and some other ones. And then what's that other platform that I just got on? It's like the gaming platform.
Oh, Discord. Yeah, Discord.
I got a couple Discords now. I'm on that. Apparently I'm on that now too, where all the kids are at. All the young kids are there.
Let's go back to
yeah.
IRC.
Yeah, I know, right? Let's give me back my CTCP and my whatever.
Or
Anyway.
ICQ. Yeah.
Oh gosh, 559-20809. That was my ICQ number.
I gotta go look mine up.
All right, let's wrap it up. We're out. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for tuning into the Modem Podcast, where yesterday's modems are today's transponders. For more information or to request a topic, please visit modem.show.